circa 2560 BCE, Giza Plateau, Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Khufu contains 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, and to complete it in the 23 years of Khufu's reign, workers would need to place one block every 2 to 3 minutes, 24 hours a day, for 2 decades without stopping. Modern engineers with cranes, computers, and steel cannot replicate this feat. Yet Bronze Age workers with copper tools supposedly did it routinely. How did people without wheels, iron, or pulleys achieve what we still cannot explain? 20 kilometers southwest of modern Cairo, the Giza Plateau rises from the desert like a monument to everything we think we understand about human history. 3 pyramids stand against the sky, and the largest of them, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, measures 146.6 meters tall. For nearly 4,000 years, it was the tallest structure humans ever built. That alone should tell you something is different here. But the real mystery is not how tall it stands. The mystery is how it was built at all. The numbers do not make sense. The Great Pyramid contains roughly 2.3 million limestone blocks. Most of these blocks weigh about 2.5 tons each. Some weigh much more. The granite blocks inside the king's chamber, deep in the heart of the pyramid, weigh up to 80 tons. These granite blocks came from Aswan, a quarry located 800 kilometers to the south. Somehow, workers moved 80-ton stones across 800 kilometers of desert and river, then lifted them 60 meters into the air, then placed them with such precision that the joints between them measured less than 1/50th of an inch. And they did this during the 4th dynasty of Egypt's Old Kingdom, around 2580 to 2560 BCE, during the reign of a pharaoh named Khufu. According to Egyptologists, the entire structure took between 20 and 23 years to complete. Do the math. If you have 2.3 million blocks and 20 years to place them, you need to set one block every 2.5 minutes. Not during working hours. Not during daylight. Every 2.5 minutes around the clock for 2 decades straight. No vacations. No mistakes, no delays for weather, injuries, or the annual flooding of the Nile that made construction impossible for months each year. When you account for the flood season, the rate becomes even faster. 1 block every 2 minutes or less, every single day for 20 years. The conventional explanation has always been simple. Egyptian workers used copper tools to cut the stones. They used wooden sledges to drag them across the sand. They built massive ramps that spiraled up the sides of the pyramid, and they pulled the blocks into place using nothing but rope and human muscle. Tens of thousands of laborers working together, organized by brilliant architects driven by religious devotion or royal command. It sounds reasonable. It sounds possible, except it is not. Copper is a soft metal. When you try to cut limestone with a copper chisel, the chisel dulls within minutes. To cut 2.3 million blocks, you would need to resharpen your tools hundreds of times per day. Experimental archaeologists have tried this. They have used replica copper tools to cut limestone blocks, and they have found that the tools wear out faster than the stone does. Now imagine cutting granite, which is far harder than limestone. Copper barely scratches granite. It certainly cannot carve it with the precision found inside the king's chamber. Then there is the problem of the ramps. To reach the top of a 146-meter pyramid, you would need a ramp at least 1 kilometer long to keep the incline manageable for workers pulling multi-ton blocks. A ramp that size would require more stone and material than the pyramid itself. No evidence of such a ramp has ever been found. Not a trace. Some researchers suggest the ramps were dismantled and the stone reused, but that only raises another question. Where did all that material go? You cannot hide a pyramid's worth of stone. And then there is the precision. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north within 3/60ths of a single degree. This is not approximate. This is not close enough. This is exact. Bronze Age workers, without compasses, without magnetic instruments, without satellites, achieved a level of accuracy that modern builders struggle to match. The base of the pyramid is level to within 2.1 centimeters across a distance of 230 meters. The four sides are equal in length to within a few centimeters. These are not the measurements of primitive construction. These are the measurements of engineering that borders on perfection. But perhaps the most disturbing detail was not discovered until the 20th century. When viewed from the air, the Great Pyramid does not have four sides. It has 8. Each of the 4 faces is slightly concave, curving inward by a few degrees. This detail is invisible from the ground. You cannot see it unless you are above the pyramid, looking down. Why would ancient builders include a feature that no one could see? How did they even know it was there? And how did they achieve it with such consistency across all 4 sides? The ancient Egyptians left no explanation. No papyri describe how the pyramids were built. No blueprints, no instructions, no records of the construction process at all. Later, Egyptian dynasties stopped building pyramids entirely, as if the knowledge had been lost. When the Greek historian Herodotus visited Egypt in 450 BCE, more than 2,000 years after the pyramids were built, even the Egyptians he spoke with could only guess at how it was done. They told him stories of machines made from short wooden planks, but they did not know for certain. The knowledge was already gone. So here is what we know for certain. Bronze Age workers built the most precisely constructed building in human history. They did it faster than modern engineers believe is possible. They did it with tools that should not have worked. They left no explanation for how they did it. And then, sometime between the Old Kingdom and now, humanity forgot how to build pyramids. The question is not just how they did it. The question is, what are we missing? For more than 2 centuries, archaeologists and engineers have tried to reverse engineer the pyramids. They have measured, calculated, excavated, and theorized. They have built scale models and run computer simulations. They have tested ancient tools and attempted reconstructions. And yet, with every answer they find, the mystery only deepens. Start with the timeline. Khufu ruled Egypt from approximately 2589 to 2566 BCE, a reign of 23 years. If the Great Pyramid was built entirely during his reign, then the workers had less than a quarter century to complete it. But construction could not happen year-round. Every summer, the Nile River flooded, covering the surrounding land with water and making it impossible to transport stone or work on the site. This flood season lasted roughly 3 to 4 months every year. That means the workforce had about 240 working days per year at most. Multiply 240 days by 23 years, and you get 5,520 working days. Divide 2.3 million blocks by 5,520 days, and the math becomes impossible to ignore. Workers needed to quarry, transport, and place more than 400 blocks every single day. That is 1 block every 2.5 minutes during daylight hours, assuming a 12-hour workday. Faster if the workday was shorter. Now consider the tools. Archaeologists have found copper saws, chisels, and blades at ancient Egyptian sites. Copper was the hardest metal available during the Old Kingdom. Iron did not exist in Egypt yet. Bronze, which is harder than copper, was rare and expensive. So the workers cutting 2.3 million blocks were using soft copper tools to shape hard limestone and even harder granite. Experimental archaeology has tested this. In the 1990s, researchers tried to cut limestone using replica copper tools. They found that a copper chisel dulls after cutting just a few inches of stone. The blade has to be resharpened constantly. Even with resharpening, the tool wears down completely within hours. To cut millions of blocks, workers would need millions of tools. And constant resharpening would require a massive infrastructure of metal workers operating alongside the construction site. No evidence of such an operation has been found. Then there is the granite problem. The king's chamber, located deep inside the pyramid, contains massive granite beams weighing up to 80 tons each. Granite is an igneous rock, far harder than limestone. Copper tools barely scratch it. Modern stonemasons use diamond-tipped saws and power tools to cut granite. And even then, the process is slow and difficult. Ancient Egyptians supposedly cut these beams with copper saws, transported them 800 kilometers from the Aswan quarries, floated them down the Nile on wooden barges, dragged them across the desert, lifted them 60 meters into the air, and set them in place with joints so tight that a sheet of paper cannot fit between them. When engineer Christopher Dunn examined the tool marks inside the king's chamber in 1995, he found grooves and patterns that suggested high-speed cutting, not the slow scraping of hand tools. He published his findings in 1998, arguing that the precision could only be explained by advanced machining. Mainstream Egyptology dismissed his work without peer review. The ramp theory has similar problems. For decades, the standard explanation was that workers built a massive external ramp that spiraled around the pyramid as it grew taller, but the mathematics do not work. To reach the top of a 146-meter structure, the ramp would need to be over a kilometer long to maintain a slope gentle enough for workers to pull multi-ton blocks. A ramp that size would contain more material than the pyramid itself. And when the pyramid was finished, the ramp would need to be dismantled and the material removed. No trace of such a ramp exists. No debris field. No quarry nearby with evidence of that much stone being extracted and then discarded. In 2007, French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin proposed an alternative. He suggested the Egyptians used an internal ramp, a spiraling corridor built inside the pyramid itself. This would explain the lack of external evidence, but it does not solve the problem of precision or speed. It also does not explain how the first third of the pyramid was built before the internal ramp could even begin. Witness testimony from the ancient world only adds to the confusion. Herodotus, writing in 440 BCE, claimed that Khufu enslaved the entire population of Egypt to build his tomb. He wrote that 100,000 men worked in 3-month shifts and that the project brought the country into misery. But Herodotus was writing 2,000 years after the pyramids were built. He was repeating stories, not facts. Modern archaeology has found evidence that contradicts him. In the 1990s, archaeologists discovered a worker village near the Giza Plateau. The graves there show that the workers were not slaves, but skilled laborers who were buried with honor. The tombs contain bread, beer, and tools, suggesting the workers were valued members of society. But even if the workers were willing and organized, the population estimates do not add up. Most scholars believe the workforce numbered between 20,000 and 30,000 people, far fewer than Herodotus claimed. Could 20,000 workers really move 400 blocks per day, every day, for 20 years? Then, in the 1970s, French scientist Joseph Davidovits proposed a theory that challenged everything. He suggested the blocks were not carved at all. Instead, he argued, the Egyptians cast them in place using a type of ancient concrete made from crushed limestone, water, and natural minerals. This geopolymer theory would explain the precision, the speed, and the lack of tool marks. If the blocks were poured into molds rather than cut from quarries, then the construction time becomes manageable. But the theory was radical, and Egyptologists rejected it almost immediately. Davidovits was not an archaeologist. He was a materials scientist. His ideas did not fit the established narrative. Then, in 2006, researchers analyzed samples from the pyramid blocks under a microscope. They found air bubbles and organic fibers inside the stone. Natural limestone does not contain air bubbles. Organic fibers do not appear in sedimentary rock. The findings suggested that at least some of the blocks were artificially made, not quarried. Davidovits published the results, but mainstream Egyptology did not respond. The evidence was ignored, filed away, left unanswered. In 2015, thermal imaging scans of the Great Pyramid revealed temperature anomalies. Certain blocks were warmer than others, suggesting hidden chambers or voids beneath the surface. The Egyptian government restricted further scanning. In 2017, scientists using cosmic ray muon imaging discovered a massive void above the Grand Gallery, a space larger than a passenger jet, with no known purpose and no entrance. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities called it a construction gap, nothing more. Independent researchers were denied access. The mystery was not solving itself, it was multiplying. Every new discovery raised 10 new questions. And the closer anyone looked, the less sense the official story made. Something changed in the 1960s. Before that decade, questioning the construction of the pyramids was considered legitimate academic inquiry. Engineers, architects, and Egyptologists debated theories openly. Journals published competing ideas. But by the 1970s, the conversation had shifted. Alternative theories were no longer debated. They were dismissed. Researchers who questioned the ramp theory or suggested advanced techniques were labeled pseudo-archaeologists. Their work was excluded from peer-reviewed journals. Access to the pyramids became restricted. Independent research was discouraged. The official narrative hardened into dogma. Ask an Egyptologist today how the pyramids were built, and the answer is always the same: ramps, copper tools, and human labor. The details may vary, but the conclusion does not. The pyramids were built by Egyptians using known ancient techniques. End of discussion. But engineers do not agree. Structural engineers, construction managers, and material scientists who have studied the pyramids often come to different conclusions. They point to the precision, the speed, the scale, and they say the same thing. This should not be possible with Bronze Age technology. In 1978, engineer Christopher Dunn visited the Great Pyramid for the first time. He spent years measuring the interior chambers, examining tool marks, and analyzing the granite surfaces. What he found disturbed him. The granite coffer inside the king's chamber, a massive rectangular box carved from a single piece of red granite, showed tool marks that were too uniform, too precise, too fast to have been made by hand. The interior corners were perfectly square. The walls were parallel to within thousandths of an inch. Dunn compared the marks to modern machining and found they matched the patterns left by high-speed drills and saws. In 1998, he published a book arguing that the ancient Egyptians had access to advanced tools, possibly even powered machinery. Egyptologists did not engage with his evidence. They dismissed him as an engineer, not an archaeologist, as if expertise in construction was irrelevant to understanding construction. Then there is the matter of the records, or rather, the complete absence of them. Ancient Egypt was a bureaucratic society. Scribes recorded everything. Tax collections, grain stores, military campaigns, temple donations, even minor trade agreements were written down on papyrus and preserved. The Egyptians documented their world obsessively, and yet not a single papyrus describes how the pyramids were built. Not one. No blueprint, no workforce manifest, no logistics plan, no celebration of completion. The largest construction project in Egyptian history, a monument that required decades of labor and millions of man-hours, left no written record. Later, dynasties continued to build temples, tombs, and monuments, but they stopped building pyramids. The architectural knowledge vanished. By the time of the New Kingdom, 1,000 years later, Egyptians were building smaller, simpler tombs cut into rock cliffs. The Pyramid Age was over, and no one knew why. Herodotus wrote in 440 BCE that Khufu brought the country into all sorts of misery, that he compelled all Egyptians to work for him, shutting down temples and forbidding sacrifices. But Herodotus also admitted he was repeating what Egyptian priests told him, and those priests were living more than 2,000 years after Khufu. The stories had become legend, myth, campfire tales passed down across a gap of time so vast that the truth had been worn smooth. In 2007, Jean-Pierre Houdin announced his internal ramp theory to international media. He had spent years working with scientists and 3D modelers to simulate the construction process. His theory suggested a spiraling ramp inside the pyramid, hidden within the structure itself. It was elegant, it was plausible, it solved some of the logistical problems, but it did not solve the problem of speed, or precision, or the granite beams, or the tool marks Dunn had documented, and it certainly did not explain why no ancient text mentioned it. Houdin requested permission to scan the pyramid using non-invasive imaging to test his theory. The Egyptian government denied the request. Theories continued to emerge, each one stranger than the last. Some researchers suggested the Egyptians used kites or balloons to lift the stones. Others proposed that the blocks were dragged up sand ramps that were later washed away by rain. A few argued that sound waves or resonance frequencies were used to levitate the stones, and based on ancient legends of priests moving objects with chance. Mainstream archaeology dismissed these ideas as fringe nonsense, but they did not offer a better explanation. The ramp theory remained the official answer, even though no ramp had ever been found and the mathematics made it nearly impossible. Then, in 2018, scientists published a study that should have changed everything. Researchers had used electromagnetic scanning to study how the Great Pyramid interacted with radio waves. What they discovered was astonishing. The pyramid concentrated electromagnetic energy in its internal chambers and beneath its base. The structure acted like a resonator, focusing energy in specific locations. This was not intentional decoration. This was physics. The shape, the materials, the dimensions They all combined to create an effect that required knowledge of electromagnetic theory. But electromagnetic theory was not discovered until the 19th century. How could Bronze Age builders design a structure with electromagnetic properties they could not measure, test, or even know existed? The study was published in the Journal of Applied Physics. It was peer-reviewed. It was legitimate science. And it was largely ignored. A few news outlets ran stories, but within weeks, the discovery faded from public attention. Egyptologists did not comment. The Egyptian government did not respond. The official narrative did not change. Meanwhile, evidence continued to disappear. In the 1970s, researchers were allowed to take core samples from the pyramid blocks for analysis. By the 1990s, that permission was revoked. Thermal imaging scans conducted in 2015 showed heat anomalies that suggested hidden voids or chambers. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities announced the findings, then shut down further investigation. In 2017, the Muon Imaging Project revealed a massive void above the Grand Gallery, a space with no known function. The ministry called it a construction gap and forbade any physical exploration. Witnesses, too, began to go silent. Engineers who had spoken openly about the pyramid's impossibilities in the 1980s stopped giving interviews. Researchers who had published alternative theories retired or moved on to safer topics. Academic careers were quietly ended. Grants were denied. The message was clear. Do not question the narrative. And yet, the pyramid still stands. 2.3 million blocks, aligned to true north, level to within centimeters. Electromagnetic properties we cannot explain, built in 20 years by workers with copper tools. The official story holds, but only if you do not look too closely. Only if you do not ask too many questions. Only if you ignore the evidence that does not fit. In 2019, a team of engineers and stonemasons attempted to build a small pyramid using only ancient techniques. They had modern knowledge, detailed plans, and unlimited time. They were trying to build a structure just 6 meters tall, a fraction of the size of the Great Pyramid. After weeks of work, they managed to construct a crude, uneven pile of stones that barely resembled a pyramid. The corners were not square. The sides were not equal. The blocks did not fit together tightly. They had failed to replicate what Bronze Age Egyptians supposedly did routinely, at a scale 20 times larger, and with none of the tools, knowledge, or infrastructure we have today. The most terrifying fact is not that we do not know how the pyramids were built. The most terrifying fact is that we once knew, and then we forgot. Today, the Great Pyramid of Khufu is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Millions of tourists visit it every year. They take photographs, buy souvenirs, and listen to tour guides repeat the same explanations that have been repeated for decades. Ramps, copper tools, and human labor. The story is comforting. It fits our understanding of history as a straight line, moving from primitive to advanced, from simple to complex. It allows us to believe that we are the pinnacle of human achievement, that our technology represents the height of what is possible. But the pyramid does not care what we believe. It stands there, in 146 meters of limestone and granite, aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree. Built with precision we cannot match and speed we cannot explain. The official case status has not changed. According to Egyptologists, the mystery is solved. The pyramids were built by skilled Egyptian laborers using techniques appropriate to the Bronze Age. Files are not sealed because there is nothing to hide. The matter is settled. Except it is not. independent researchers are still denied access to certain areas of the pyramid. Core sampling is still forbidden. Thermal imaging and electromagnetic studies are still restricted. In 2023, a team of international scientists requested permission to use ground-penetrating radar to map the voids discovered in 2017. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities denied the request, stating that further investigation was unnecessary. When pressed for an explanation, ministry officials said only that the pyramid had already been thoroughly studied. The transformation this mystery has caused is subtle but profound. In the 19th century, pyramids were seen as tombs, monuments to dead kings, built by slaves driven by whips and fear. By the mid-20th century, that image had softened. Workers were no longer slaves but honored craftsmen. The pyramids were no longer symbols of oppression, but symbols of human cooperation and achievement. And now, in the 21st century, the pyramids have become something else entirely. They are symbols of lost knowledge, of capabilities we no longer possess, of questions we cannot answer. What happened to the investigators? Christopher Dunn continues to write and lecture, but his work is not taught in universities. Jean-Pierre Houdin's internal ramp theory is mentioned occasionally, but it has not been tested because access to the pyramid's interior for invasive research is denied. Joseph Davidovits, the scientist who proposed the geopolymer theory, published his findings in peer-reviewed journals, but mainstream Egyptology does not cite his work. These men are not discredited. They are simply ignored, their research filed away in the margins of acceptable discourse. What happened to the witnesses? There are no witnesses. The last people who knew how the pyramids were built died more than 4,000 years ago. They left no instructions, no records, no explanation. Later Egyptians, the ones Herodotus spoke to, could only guess. And we, with all our satellites and computers and advanced degrees, can do no better. What happened to the place itself? The Giza Plateau is surrounded now by the sprawling city of Cairo. Hotels and apartment buildings crowd the edge of the archaeological site. Smog from traffic hangs in the air. The Sphinx is eroded by pollution. The pyramids themselves are roped off, protected, preserved, but also contained. You can visit them, but you cannot touch them. You can photograph them, but you cannot study them independently. The Egyptian government controls access, controls the narrative, controls what questions are allowed to be asked. And what do we still not know? We do not know how 2.3 million blocks were quarried, transported, and placed with such speed. We do not know how granite was cut with copper tools. We do not know why no construction records exist. We do not know how alignment to true north was achieved. We do not know why the pyramid concentrates electromagnetic energy. We do not know what the void above the Grand Gallery contains, or why it is there, or how it was built. We do not know why later dynasties stopped building pyramids. We do not know what knowledge was lost, or how it was lost, or whether it was lost deliberately. Modern parallels exist. In 2019, engineers attempted to recreate a small pyramid and failed. In 2021, construction workers in Egypt tried to move a 50-ton block using only wooden sledges and ropes, as ancient Egyptians supposedly did. They could not move it more than a few meters before the sledge broke. In 2023, a computer simulation attempted to model the construction of the Great Pyramid, using only Bronze Age technology and known techniques. The simulation failed to complete the structure within the 23-year time frame. Every attempt to replicate the feat ends in failure. We like to think of history as progress, a slow climb from ignorance to knowledge. We look at ancient civilizations and see people who were less advanced, less capable, less intelligent than we are. We build skyscrapers and bridges and space stations, and we assume that our ancestors could never have matched our achievements. But the Great Pyramid is not a primitive structure. It is the most accurately constructed building in human history. Its base is level to within 2.1 centimeters across 230 meters. Its sides are equal in length to within centimeters. It stood as the world's tallest structure for 3,800 years, longer than any other building before or since. Perhaps the real mystery is not what the ancient Egyptians knew. Perhaps the real mystery is what we have forgotten. History is not always a straight line. Civilizations rise and fall. Knowledge is gained and lost. The Romans knew how to make concrete that could set underwater and last for thousands of years. We only rediscovered that formula in the 20th century. The Greeks built mechanical computers with gears and dials to track the movements of planets. The technology was lost and not recreated until the Renaissance. The Baghdad battery suggests ancient people understood electrochemistry, though we do not know how or why. What if the pyramids are the same? What if they represent a peak of knowledge that was reached and then abandoned, not because it was primitive, but because it was too difficult to maintain? What if the skills required to build them were so specialized, so complex, so dependent on a specific set of conditions, that when those conditions changed, the knowledge simply vanished? We stand at the foot of the Great Pyramid with our phones and our cameras and our scientific instruments, and we cannot explain it. We measure it, scan it, analyze it, and the mystery only deepens. We are told the answer is simple, that Bronze Age workers with copper tools built it using ramps and determination. But when we try to replicate it, we fail. When we examine the evidence closely, it does not add up. When we ask for access to study it further, we are denied. The Great Pyramid was built in approximately 2560 BCE. It has stood for more than 4,500 years. It will likely stand for thousands more. And every year, millions of people will visit it. Take their pictures and go home believing they understand how it was built. But the truth is simpler and far more unsettling. We do not know. We have theories, guesses, simulations, and models. But we do not know. Somewhere between the Bronze Age and now, humanity built the most precisely engineered structure in history and then forgot how to do it. The question is not just what we have forgotten. The question is, what else do we not know that we once did? What other knowledge has slipped through the cracks of time, lost to collapsing civilizations, burned libraries, and the simple passage of centuries? How much of what we think is progress is actually just rediscovery? And if we could forget how to build the pyramids, what else might we lose? The Great Pyramid stands. The mystery remains. And the only certainty is that we still do not have the answers.